On this episode of Future Now, I'm joined by Neil Darvill, who helps steer North Bristol NHS Trust from legacy tech and daily frustrations to a culture of accountability and innovation. If you're curious about how to drive real change in complex systems, this one's for you. So Neil, thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the show. For those who don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how long you've been in the NHS.
Thank you, Casey. So a little bit about me. I've been in the NHS since 1991, I think. And all my roles have been in digital transformation and leadership, starting off obviously slightly less senior and culminating into my current job, which is an amazing opportunity and privilege, being an executive level Chief Digital Information Officer at, I think, the third largest NHS group in the NHS in England. So a huge opportunity and a huge challenge, really important work.
Brilliant. And tell us a bit more about this, the group of hospitals. Tell me about how you got into that, and was that something that you shaped from the start, or was that a coming together and you found yourself in the right place at the right time?
I'd love to think that I was instrumental in that approach, but the reality is we are hospitals, and the driver for the coming together in a group format is driven absolutely by our ambition to improve our clinical services. It has to be said that where you have two hospitals working as a group, where potentially the outcomes that you get for different levels of service are different. So if the ambulance turns left, you get a different outcome than if the ambulance turns right.
Sure.
And we consider that to be completely unacceptable. So we have put all our efforts in to creating a joint clinical strategy that is now being used to form all the reasons why we need to work really close together as two separate trusts to deliver a very clear patient-centric approach to improving the quality of care.
Brilliant. Thank you. And just for context, for those who are meeting you and I for the first time today, the relationship between Block and NBT is where things started back in 2017, 2018, when yourself and North Bristol were on the procurement looking for a digital transformational partner. Tell us what got you from the start. So you joined NBT in 2015. Talk us through the process of getting from that stage to effectively getting to a point where you're looking for a trusted partner to move North Bristol into a new transformational world.
So it's really important, I think, in terms of having trusted partners, those relationships really critical to delivering high quality care. Even though it's a technology, it's actually only valuable because it delivers high quality care and empowers the people who deliver care, our clinicians. It gives them that environment. I think when I started my journey at North Bristol, there's always a lot of transformation work needed when you go into an organisation for the first time, particularly one that's had, a fairly difficult time with its digitisation journey. Its digital maturity was very low, very paper-based in all of its administrative processes. And I get the opportunity to go in and to try and develop strategies that will take us into a modernisation space and deliver those improvements that our patients deserve. So as we proceed through that process, there's an element really of obviously creating capability within the organisation to actually manage things properly. So that takes a piece of time. Then there is the fundamental culture and confidence change in the organisational leadership to make sure that the opportunities to get the investment, to be in the prioritisation of organisational investment and delivery of improvements. Takes time to develop that cycle of improvement and confidence. And then you get to the tipping point where actually then you need, because of the constraints faced by, an aged, fragmented infrastructure, you can't get that fast-paced, highly reliable, strong basis foundation of basically access, so that you get to the point where you need to resolve that challenge. And that's often, as you say, done with a procurement with a partner, and then obviously the subsequent business cases and approval investments, and then of course the easy part, which is the massive implementation of all of those complex things. But the real benefit you see is every day in clinic, where our clinicians turn up and sit down and turn on their computer, and it's there and it's working and it's reliable, and it's not anything that they have to think about. We give them that environment so they can spend all their time in clinic thinking about their patients, because the technology just works.
So you've been through a number of digital transformations across a few different organizations. I fully appreciate, from a technical perspective, that it is that, once you get to that point of deploying the technology, that is the easy bit. Tell me, how do you navigate the internal, approval processes, the cultural change, not just of the users, but of the senior board? I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that there's many people who are in your position who find themselves a bit daunted by how to approach their senior leadership teams and the board and making that big change. So, we've talked about some of those stepping stones from a technology perspective, but what does it look like behind the scenes for you, taking the whole trust through all those different approval stages?
So it is a tricky element to the role. Organizations, hospitals have got a definite, definitive budget and lots of cost pressures on that budget. If it comes down to, buying a new CT machine or investing in an IT system, the decisions can be very difficult to make, I do, though, think that it's really powerful when you're dealing with a thing like a trust board, where you've got a group of people, very senior, very experienced people who want to do the right thing, is one, to give them an opportunity to understand the issues, because of course it is about connectivity and access and service, but it's also about security and safety and control. So there are ways of articulating those things. And one of the techniques that I think is quite useful is you make sure that you transfer the risk from digital into the board. So you put forward the proposal that says, actually, we need to upgrade this system, replace the firewalls, or do X, Y, Z. And this is the benefit, and this is the cost, and these are the risks that we mitigate. And the board has to make the decision of, yes, we prioritize that and you can proceed, or no, we choose to accept that risk. Yeah. So I think my duty is not to hold the risk. My duty is to offer the opportunity for the risks to be considered and then mitigated where they are unacceptable. And the board needs to be empowered to take control of that agenda and make those decisions. And I think if you go through a really methodical, informed process and take your board members on that journey, you will get a really well-informed set of decisions back.
Yeah, very good. So using that as the backbone of the process that you've gone through a number of times, I'm going to take you back to 2018, the first digital transformation that you embarked on with Block. Tell me, so this was over in North Bristol. What was the catalyst for change? What did you see that made you realise we need to bring fundamental change here? And tell me then, not only what was the challenges you were trying to overcome, but what did you see really as the opportunity at that time?
So I think I've touched a bit upon it already, but I think the fundamental elements are that that organisation had the technologies, the underlying technologies, they just weren't working very well. There were several of them, and they didn't particularly work well together. And so that manifests itself into slow performance, unreliability, service interruptions. And of course, we're talking about service interruptions to things like telephony. So things that are very difficult to justify in terms of safety. So you have an environment like that, and people take different approaches, and I'm sure they're all valid depending on the circumstances. But my perspective is that is a fundamental, unacceptable risk, and we have to get the organisation to the place where cementing those foundations and providing an enterprise environment, end to end, every part of the organisation for every user every day is high quality, rock solid and safe. And therefore the only way to do that is to put a case in to replace all of the old, out of date and poorly functioning infrastructure, replace it with modern technology, and to go out to the market to find a partner who shares that vision and wants to work with you in that way.
So Neil, when we're talking about moving towards a digital transformation, I understand that you've got the internal approval processes to work through. You've then got the choosing of the technology and what's right for where. But I'm always conscious that there's a huge number of people, the backbone of any organization or trust. And those people need to be inspired and taken along for that journey. And that journey can be a year, 2 years, sometimes a lot longer. How do you inspire that confidence in all those three parts of Bristol?
So, I mean, inspiring is, I'm not quite sure I'd describe it that way. I think there's a couple of dimensions to that question. So the first for me is in terms of providing services to the staff, our clinicians, our nurses, our operational teams, our divisional teams. There is an expectation, I think, and quite rightly, that this stuff should be there and it should work effectively for them. And I think the inspiration isn't so much about that. I think it's about engaging with those people to make sure that the services and the solutions you're providing match their expectations and their needs and the requirements for them, because they're the people that deliver the care. So I think there's a process of making sure that your stakeholder management and your relationships really do work in terms of getting the information you need to provide the right solutions. I would reflect back, though, that there's also another team of people, which is the team that sit in digital, who actually have realistically the role of making this stuff work every day and being the responsive frontline kind of interface between those staff and the digital. And I think the thing that's often overlooked is that with any technological transformation, you really have to work hard at empowering those people to have the confidence and support them with training and development, learning how to use new technology. It isn't about the technology turning up and people kind of scratching their heads and thinking, well, what do we do? What do we do with this? How do we make this work? How do we get the best out of this? There has to be that kind of symbiotic approach where those people are appropriately empowered with the right support, so that the technology is able to be utilised. As I said, I've said it before, that we're a hospital. The technology is irrelevant unless it really helps the people who help the patients.
Absolutely. And I know, from knowing you in over 3 years now, everything that you do for the hospital group, the trusts, your people, it's all outcome based. It's all about, if we're not moving in the direction of saving lives, then we're going backwards.
So saving lives sounds a little bit dramatic, but actually is real sometimes. But the so the day-to-day benefits are around efficiency and operational safety. So we are able to manage our waiting lists really well. We're able to get patients seen as quickly as possible. We have those elements of efficiency. When you see processes working really poorly with hybrid environments of paper and technology and lots of different systems to use, and then poor Wi-Fi and slow access and spinning circles of frustration on computer desktops. And when you see those environments, you realize what an impediment it can be to for our clinicians to do what they want to do as well as they want to do it. So, the opportunity is clear.
And do you think, is there a risk that our clinicians have become used to that level of service? This isn't across Bristol now, this is just across the NHS. And do you think that acceptance that this is just the way it is causing issues within the amount of patients we're able to see across a year, for example?
So I'm fortunate to have quite a lot of experience across quite a few organisations. And I think what you learn from that is that the environment that people work in, they very quickly become assimilated to and then start making workarounds within. I remember in one job I had, slightly smaller job, but the service desk operated a fault response performance where everything that was logged with the service desk was actually fixed within 2 hours. And therefore I used to get emails from disgruntled doctors who were waiting half a day. And I've worked in another organisation where the average fixed time was a week. And I got emails congratulating me on amazing performance from doctors where it was fixed in 2 days. So it isn't that necessarily the service, it is the environment in which people are basing their comparison. People will think a service is good if it's slightly better than they expect. The reality is, though, that I have to be the custodian of those standards so that we are moving towards standards that are not necessarily those that people have got used to, but are actually standards that we would be proud of in terms of industry performance with our technology.
In the words of Jurassic Park, life finds a way. And I think, when you've got hardworking people just trying to do the best they can and systems don't let them get the access that they need, workarounds unfortunately become quite a common practice. We see that a lot with security as well, a lot of shadow IT outside of the digital team. Have you come across that, and how do you deal with it?
So you're right, people do find a way. And often in some organisations, particularly those that have not necessarily had strong, cohesive, senior digital leadership, you tend to find that people have ambition in clinical teams and departments and divisions. They have those ambitions and they go away and try and fulfill those ambitions the best they can. You could almost argue that they have achieved progress despite the corporate enabling of a digital service. The reality is, though, is that that's often done in a very fragmented way, often done quite poorly, doesn't reflect things around information governance or cybersecurity. But the biggest concern is, of course, you have all of your clinical information fragmented into many, many different places, much of which is not accessible by many. And therefore, and that often that tips into this shadow IT concept where data and systems are managed outside of corporate awareness, which actually could be very dangerous. So I have a very clear view about the fact that we have to be absorbing those variation, running bigger systems doing more and eliminating fewer systems doing specifics, so that we get all of our data into as fewer places as possible, so it's readily available to be accessed by our clinicians when they need to, and it's data collected at all points in a patient pathway. So that's what we have to do as an ambition, but obviously sometimes we're starting from kind of the opposite end of where we would sit with that.
So we work with a lot of trusts and health boards across the UK, and we really see quite a difference in terms of the way in which digital leaders approach the market, quite honestly. And often I see procurement running the choosing and selecting of a partner. But who knows best, procurement or digital? from what I've seen from the way in which Bristol operate, those decisions are chosen and made at the digital level, not procurement. If you agree with that, how have you navigated it to be that way within Bristol?
So what's really important is to recognise that procurement is an essential component, and the expertise needed in procurement is absolutely valuable in making sure you have a compliant, legally acceptable, reasonable processes. So there is no doubt they are an essential part of any procurement purchasing exercise. I think the thing that I'm very keen to make sure happens is that the expertise that's needed to ensure that the right things are being procured, that has to be present in the process. So it's really important to get the balance where the procurement team are empowered with all the information they need to make sure that the right things are being purchased. And then the procurement expertise kicks in to make sure that the processes that are used to do the procurement are the right ones and that they are appropriate for that process.
Yeah, totally agree. 2% of Bristol's annual budget goes towards digital. So it's therefore incredibly important that you make maximum return and biggest impact from that investment. How do you prioritize and select, where that money gets spent periodically, at least every year?
Okay, so I think a bit of clarification. So 2% of revenue is the base budget for digital, including all the elements, the components within a digital service, everything from transformation to switchboard to help desk and in between. That's fairly low as a percentage in real terms compared to other large hospital groups, particularly university hospital groups. However, we operate in a way where we're significantly supplemented with capital funding, so non-recurrent investment each year. So the net spend, if you like, is slightly more. So I wouldn't want to allow my finance colleagues to fidget when they were seeing this described, because there is a reasonable level of investment that does stack up well with our peers to enable us to do that. But nonetheless, it is a scarce resource, and we do have to go through a process of prioritization. And to be honest, I don't think we're not doing as much as we could because of the funding. If we had more investment, we could certainly do more things. We could increase the pace. I've got a fantastic team of people, and the quality of the work we do is excellent. But with a supplementary investment, we could certainly go faster, or indeed have a bigger portfolio of projects in flight. And I think that's the negotiation opportunity against other priorities that the organisation has to deal with. In terms of those priorities and that prioritisation process, it has to be stakeholder driven. You have to have links into your organisation to your divisional, clinical and operational leadership, so that we very much listen to the priorities and the requirements that are coming from that. And then, of course, supplement them with our own requirements to make sure that there are solid foundations and cybersecurity is not neglected and upgrades are done and all those other things, as well as then some of the other transformational and operational delivery type elements.
Brilliant. Yeah. So Neil, I have the luxury of working day in, day out with the majority of your digital teams across all their different functions. They do a hell of a job. A big part of that is their approach to the leadership that you and your team have brought. I'd love to get your thoughts on, we see that they embrace the partnership way of working, which is just absolutely crucial for the success that you and the team have driven. So talk to me a little bit about your experience of the team and, what the rising stars and what you see amongst those guys as real game changing.
So, I mean, the starting point is you can't really achieve anything unless you have the right people. So it's really around looking after and looking out for the people. So I always have focused on making sure that our teams are informed about what's happening. They are involved and engaged in decision making. They have training and development programs, even in frugal times where we're struggling to find investment for things, I never remove the training and development budgets for our either our technicians or for some of our leadership team, so that we continue to grow the capability and the expertise and the team spirit across the division. I think what I'm really proud of is when we have things like our staff survey, or we look at our HR statistics around things like staff turnover and length of service. We have an incredibly stable environment, and the team of people we have been with us for a long time. I think that must describe that we either pay them too much or they really enjoy it, or a combination of both. But genuinely, we are very fortunate to have a fantastic group of people. The attitude and the culture and the whole vibe of the team is right from my perspective. And I think all of those things are demonstrated in the fact we get really positive feedback from the team. And I think, empowering people and trusting them, and allowing people to, innovate and to fail and to learn, and all of those things, just create those types of environment. And I'm very fortunate to have a great team that does well in that.
I think it's a fantastic policy, at times of austerity when funding is strapped, maintaining that training and that coaching and that personal development. As you can imagine, we work with lots of different customers. I speak to lots of different customers every day, and staff turnover is a big problem. And it's how do you keep them? And it's funny, we joke about the money side of things, but actually I'm finding more and more it's about the educational piece. So anything that almost furnishes that for them keeps them inspired and stimulated in the role. So it's great to hear that.
And in the technical environment, of course, providing people with the latest technology to work with, being at the kind of cutting edge of learning those kinds of skills is a great, very desirable environment for people. And so, we're not stale and static. Continue to innovate in those areas, and I think the staff do well in that space.
So Neil, you've talked us through the innovation and getting the digital infrastructure right across the trust. We've talked from 2018 up to today. Tell me what's coming next.
So what's next is really more of the same, really. The strategy is very clear. I touched on it earlier, but it's around making sure that we utilize our systems to the full. We make them as simple as possible. We converge, simplify, reduce the number of places where data is held, and give people a really functional environment. And of course, that's very easy to say in a sentence, even though I didn't say it very well. It's easy to say in a sentence, but actually is a great deal of work involved in hundreds of systems that are in play. And how do you systematically deal with all of that variation, all of those separate locations? So we're on that journey of literally going through and expanding the use of our bigger systems and reducing or stopping the use of other systems, or merging 2 or 3 systems that do the same thing into one version of that, and all of those successive elements that the strategy defines as creating an environment that our clinicians have described to us as their requirement, really, which is to have all the data in as fewer places as possible and a simple environment to use to access it and record to it. So we're on that journey, and we're fairly digitally mature now. I'm proud to say a couple of years ago we completely eliminated all the paper health records, and so now we're only dealing with the occasional bits and bobs of paper, and fundamentally a great deal of our clinical practice is now using the digital environment, which of course is supported by our infrastructure. So yeah, I think we're well on the journey. As I think I said earlier, it'd be great if we could accelerate that and do more. But actually, considering what we invest and the progress we've made, I think it's quite impressive.
Very much so. So Neil, as a result of the transformation that you've put in place over in NBT, what would you say is the one positive outcome that's come from that?
So that's a tough question. I mean, I would say we are more efficient. I would say that, we're more, we have more standardized approaches to things with limited variation. But if you were to push me to say one thing, I would say we are safer.
So Neil, looking back over your career so far, if you could go back and tell Neil Darvill from 15 years ago, or even today, people who are newly appointed into their CDIO or digital director role, what advice would you give them based on everything you've learned to date?
Advice. Well, I'm thinking back to the first job I got where I was an executive member of the board was in 2004. So I'm not suggesting I've broken any world record, but I'd be really amazed if there was a CDIO out in the NHS that had a longer executive tenure. So email me. But I think the advice I would give is if you're not in the position to make the right influences, work on the people that are and get your messages into the mix, and try and empower your organisation to understand the issues and the risks and the challenges that you're facing. Because often people, certainly very skilled people who are working, perhaps, 1 or 2 levels down in the organisation, they will hold those risks and they will manage those issues, and it will mean that it's barely visible at the most senior level. And that's where organisations then get into trouble. So it's about not being tempted to hold those risks and to make those issues disappear, but to deal with them. But at the same time, you have to make communication key and allow the board to be aware of the challenges that you're managing.
Yeah. So look, Neil, thank you so much for coming and meeting us today and talking us through your experiences and what you've seen and what you've done. And really looking forward to seeing, how the future pans out too. Just a couple of very quick last questions. You're clearly, one of the most inspiring people that I've worked with. You're very driven and you're a thought leader. So I want to know, where do you get your inspiration and what gets you out of bed in the morning?
So I don't work in the NHS as a coincidence. There's lots of parts of the NHS and all of them are really important, but I wouldn't work anywhere else other than in a hospital, because when you get to walk around the hospital into the clinical areas, talking to the clinicians and do that on a regular basis, you just see what an amazing service it is with these really dedicated individuals. And I just get a kick out of being part of that. So I wouldn't work anywhere else.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.